Hi, my name is Peter McCready. I'm a professor of marine science at RMIT University, where I lead the Centre for Nature Positive Solutions, and I'm also the founder and director of the Blue Carbon Lab. There's been a lot of talk about blue carbon opportunities in the Maldives, but not a lot of action. And the focus of my talk is how to operationalize blue carbon, what to map, what to measure, where finance could come from, and how to overcome some of the barriers. And the good news is that other countries are already moving ahead in similar ways. So that gives the Maldives a real chance to fast track ambition into action. In the Maldives, as you all know, I'm sure, natural capital is the foundation of the economy. Tourism and fisheries together make up about half of GDP and jobs. We've got coral reefs, seagrass meadows, mangrove forests. We know that they act as infrastructure. For example, they protect coasts from flooding and avoid damages worth around 8% of GDP. But there's this paradox. While these ecosystems sustain the economy, the Maldives also has, get it, the highest per capita tourism carbon footprint in the world. And with the number of resorts growing rapidly, the pressure on natural assets is only increasing. So the challenge is clear. How do you grow the economy without eroding the very natural capital that it relies on? And we can ask ourselves also, what realistic nature-based options are actually on the table? Now, unlike larger nations, the Maldives can't plant vast forests. There's simply no space. That makes blue carbon, seagrass and mangroves especially important. Now, mangroves only cover a few hundred hectares. Seagrasses, however, span more than 11,000 hectares of shallow water. And there's probably a lot of um, seagrass in deep water. In fact, I've seen it diving. And that area, 11,000 hectares, is about 20 times the size of Malé, just to put into perspective. One study that was the first of its kind in the Maldives showed that seagrasses store the majority of carbon, making it really the hidden giant in blue carbon in the Maldives. But that study was based on only 3 islands. So clearly there's need to expand sampling and build national capacity. And beyond the carbon stock data, we want to understand the sequestration rates, the rates at which carbon is being drawn down. We want to develop credible maps. Right now, the estimates of seagrass area vary dramatically, and we need good maps to develop good baselines, design projects, and attract finance. And the good news is that thanks to the clear water in the Maldives and AI and remote sensing, the mapping is becoming much faster and cheaper. Let's also keep in mind that blue carbon ecosystems offer many other benefits as well. They protect our shorelines against extreme weather events, and in many parts of the world, a healthy mangrove forest can mean the difference between life and death. We know that they underpin our fisheries, providing valuable nutrition for many Maldivians. They bolster biodiversity. We've got critical habitat for rare and threatened and charismatic species like turtles. You lose the seagrass, you lose the turtles. And they also help remove pollutants from our coastline, nitrogen, plastics, heavy metals, harmful bacteria, viruses, and so on. Importantly, all those benefits I just talked about can be measured, and they can be built into natural capital accounts and linked to emerging environmental markets, carbon credits, biodiversity credits, and so on. This QR code on the bottom right-hand side of the screen takes you to a guide that our team developed for the Australian government on how to measure these ecosystem services from blue carbon ecosystems at the project level in a rigorous and credible way. I want to be realistic though. Tourists don't always see seagrasses as attractive, which is the reason why many resorts clear seagrasses from their beaches. A 2017 survey by Six Senses, the Maldives Underwater Initiative, found that over half the resorts in the area were removing seagrasses. And that actually prompted them to launch a campaign. You can look it up, hashtag Protect Maldives Seagrass campaign. I was very fortunate to be hosted twice by Six Senses to assess the feasibility of a blue carbon insetting program. And as part of that program, we mapped mangroves and seagrass in the area. We measured the emissions from travellers and really tested if we could conserve and restore seagrasses in the area to offset the emissions. Now, look, the results probably weren't what we were hoping they would be, in that there's still a long way to go to offset emissions with local seagrass restoration and conservation projects. So it's not, we found that particularly due to the the flight footprint, the carbon footprint from flights, there was a very high emission target. But during that visit, it was very helpful to, in this case, give evening talks, understand guest sentiments, understand what what's driving their selection of six sensors as a resort. And I felt very strongly from guests that there was likely to be high uptake of a carbon insetting program where we do local restoration projects with seagrass, and they would pay to offset their emissions. That would be a wonderful outcome. In addition, during the visits, it was about looking at other opportunities to switch to renewable energy, reducing reliance on diesel. We explored opportunities like seagrass wrack that was being removed from beaches, the plant material that washes up each day, converting that into biochar. And we're really working towards a credible resort level strategy that might help develop a portfolio of approaches that would help to abate emissions from guests, but also conserve and restore the natural capital in the region. Now, look, if one resort took up all those recommendations that we provided, look, it's not going to shift the dial across the whole of the Maldives. What we need would be the collective impact that would create transformation with climate communities and island resilience. Now, at a national level, so thinking really big, my understanding from the ESCAP draft report is that you've got an indicated target of 1.5 million tonnes of CO2 equivalents by 2035. That's the abatement target. Now, that number might be modest globally, but for a small island nation with limited land and other nature-based options, I think puts quite a challenge. And it does feel like deja vu. And I wanted to point to a report that we did for South Korea last year, which also had a similar target. They wanted to achieve 1.94 million tonnes of CO2 abatement with blue carbon by 2030. And our job was to test the feasibility through a desktop study, basically pulling existing maps and stock data and asking questions like what ecosystems currently exist, how much could they store if we were to conserve and restore them, what other governance and finance enablers are present to get blue carbon targets met. And we framed it as a portfolio. So yes, seagrass could be restored. We had seaweeds could be restored. Ocean alkalinity enhancement was an option, converting rack into biochar, a whole range of options. And then the task was to not only look at the scale of each of those options, but the readiness. So what could be delivered now versus what could be delivered in the future as we start to build capacity in each of these different blue carbon options that you see there on the screen. And I think a similar framing could be done here in the Maldives. So where to from here? And I want to approach this humbly because I've only just seen the report that's underpinning these meetings. Apologies if I'm a bit off base, but I'll talk about my experience in the past with doing this. So step one, get the maps and the baseline right. If you don't have credible maps of past, current, and potential future distribution of, say, seagrasses, it's pretty difficult to then develop your abatement program. Work nationally at a broad level, then drill down into hotspots where conservation and restoration look most promising. Step two, pilot projects. There's nothing like learning by doing. LAMU could be a good option, given groups like Six Senses have been thinking deeply about this and are already engaged. Step three, create a multi-stakeholder task force. You need to be thinking about the governance, the roles, the benefit sharing, the finance, and you may have already done this. Step four, establish the monitoring, reporting, and verification protocols, or MRV. And step five, possibly one of the most important, finance. What are you going to do? Is it offsetting, insetting, blended finance models? Build towards some sort of high integrity credits as the system matures. Those are the sorts of things that the task force would work out. And finally, always involve the community. What would be wonderful to see is if the tourism sector in the Maldives was directly tied to conserving and restoring Maldivian seagrasses. That would just be a wonderful outcome. And that kind of roadmap isn't new. We led a similar exercise with the Seychelles, working with government, the James Michel Foundation, SACAT, and the World Bank. That roadmap combined the science, the governance, the community, the finance into a plan. It's this one here that is, I understand, now being enacted upon. One of the headlines that I just love is that the Seychelles blue carbon ecosystems capture over 200,000 tonnes of organic carbon each year, which is equivalent to 60% of the nation's annual CO2 emissions. Would love to have a similar statistic for the Maldives, that we could report something similar. And if you go to that QR code, it'll take you to the roadmap I just described. So an opportunity to build off past works. Thanks for having me. I'd love an excuse to get back to the Maldives, and I want to thank the Maldives Underwater Initiative and Six Senses. Pretty much all the work that I've presented on has been supported through those two groups. And if you'd like to connect, my emails are there. Thanks for your time.